That's not tarry. As Shakespeare said, if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere best it were done quickly. Power on!
Humor doesn't always age well. Part of this is due to shifts in culture where we start to recognize issues in power structure and question the status quo. It can also be attributed to changes in what is viewed as important. As more people have obtained secondary education in the United States, the importance of which institution they graduated from has declined in significance. For example, the competition between whether someone attended Yale or Harvard is, well, petty at this point. Being able to attend either of these schools is only available to a select few, so arguing about which one is better doesn't make sense to many of us, mostly because we just don't care.
Well, I say let Harvard have its football and academics. Yale will always be first in gentlemanly club life. Why, every friend I have, I made right here.
Hello, Burnsy. It's your old roomie, Dink.
It's part of a classist type of humor that appeals to a small, insular group. There's a shift in culture that recognizes the school we attended is just one piece of a bigger picture that determines future success. The exponential rise in cost to attend a college or university is hampering our society from improving as a whole. Gatekeeping education from those in lower socioeconomic levels exacerbates the inequalities that exist for marginalized groups. Since there are other sources that discuss the factors that have contributed to this issue, I'll try to focus more on those that seem to fall under the radar. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell, just don't be an alpaca in the comments. With Mothra the bunny of data science to supervise, let's look at why college is once again shifting towards availability to only the wealthy elite.
Oh, some boys go to college, but we think they're all wussies, because they get all the knowledge, and we get all the...
There are several sources that discuss the change in education costs, but not as much analyzing those in charge of making the decision to increase tuition. It's not the students, it's not the parents of the students. Professors and adjunct professors have complained about stagnant wages, so if tuition is increasing, the money doesn't seem to be going to them. So who's really making the decision? In Hanson's article, Average Cost of College by Year, the average increase of higher education each year is 9% since 1970. If you look at the graph, it has increased exponentially since 1990. When I graduated from my four-year college a little over 10 years ago, tuition was half of what it is now. The campus has not had significant improvement in any of the properties, and the number of faculty and students is roughly the same. However, the college president has seen wage increases during this time, though the staff wages have mostly been stagnant. If the increase in tuition is this high, where is that money going and what is the justification? Why did my college, like so many others, double tuition within a decade? In the United States, most colleges and universities have a board of trustees or something similar, though it may be called board of regents, fellows, or overseers, and the amount of power they have varies. This entity is supposed to monitor various aspects of the institution, such as tuition, wages, class size, or property improvements. Part of the difficulty in covering this piece of college costs is that there are many differences on the trustees depending on the school. For one university, it may be a more superficial position that is there, mostly for clout or prestige, but has little impact. Yet at another university, the Board of Trustees may be the biggest factor in determining the school's future.
By all known definitions of the word boss, i.e. one with authority over another, in 9 of 11 known possible fields in which one might teach, employ, guide, oversee, and or otherwise hold dominion, the empirically provable answer to the question, who's the boss, is...
Angela Bauer.
Usually the Board of Trustees is rarely involved in the day-to-day happenings of colleges and universities. If this is the case, how do they decide on changes for the school? Well, part of it is based on information provided to them by the college president.
I'm listening.
Well, I've narrowed your choices down to 5 unthinkable options. Each will cause untold misery.
I picked number 3.
You don't even want to read them first?
I was elected to lead, not to read. Number 3.
The president of the institution is supposed to provide information on the needs of the school and highlight the school's successes. In theory, they're also supposed to give information on where the school is also falling short. However, when the president's salary increases are based off the decisions of the trustees, it's in their best interest to downplay the shortcomings of the institution in order to have a wage increase. In the Forbes article, university trustees are often clueless, does it matter? They describe the Board of Trustees as, quote, first they are the university with major decision-making powers. Second, they are also individuals dependent on resources earned from outside the academy to sustain them and their families. They potentially have clout and the advantage of a real-world perspective on life often lacking within the ivory tower. They are not going to do any bold changes. They usually have no idea what's going on campus and get it all from the president, who only wants to give them a nice glossed-over image. The president's salary and employment future is dependent on what he tells them, end quote.
Our demands are simple: a small cost of living increase and some better equipment and supplies for your children.
Oh, that's give it to him.
Yeah, in a dream world, we have a very tight budget to do what she's asking. We'd have to raise taxes.
Raise way too high as they are now. Taxes are dead.
It's your children's future.
Children are important. Yes.
It'll cost.
While wage information is not available for every college and university, if you search openpayrolls.com, this site does contain many of them. You can find the salary of college presidents and some trustees. For example, the president of Alabama State University had a salary of $330,000 in 2020. The president of the University of California had $1,088,447 in 2018. The president of Augusta University of Georgia made $899,301 in 2021. That's not to say that the president is always the highest paid employee. If we look at schools like Texas A&M, the top 5 highest paid positions with salaries all over $1 million a year are all those in the athletic department. Athletics in secondary education is a complex topic that will take more time than I can cover here. For now, we'll focus on the connection between trustees and presidents of these institutions. In the article from Onward State linked below, the Board of Trustees Committee proposed an increase of tuition for Penn State for a second year in a row. However, they added the caveat that undergraduate households with incomes of $75,000 or less would not have an increase in tuition. By doing so, the financial aid allocation budget would increase to $36 million. Inflation was mentioned as the reason for the increase, and many of the employees at Penn State would have an increase of 2.5% starting retroactively from August 2022. In the very last section, the article states that self-supporting units are not part of this proposal. This includes the College of Medicine and Athletics, which is, again, another topic in regards to the increase of tuition. On the surface, that doesn't sound too bad. The proposal recognized that those with less resources cannot afford increase in tuition, and also recognized the need for a wage increase for employees. However, that's not the full story, and since it's on this channel, it's quite likely they are covering something up. In the Center Daily's article linked below that also discusses this proposal for Penn State, quote, less than a month after increasing tuition, a Penn State executive is set to receive roughly a $71,000 annual raise, which still brings her salary to less than that of her predecessor after the Board of Trustees Subcommittee on Compensation and approved the move Wednesday afternoon. Sarah Thorndike, a Senior Vice President for Financial and Business Treasurer, will see her salary increase to $520,008, which is still below the $537,372 earned in 2019 to 2022 by the more experienced David Gray, who retired 2 years ago. Thorndike's previous salary stood at $448,800, meaning her pay increased nearly 16%. In an email, Penn State spokesperson Wyatt Dubois wrote that the pay raise brings Thorndike's salary up to 100% of the median for public institutions in the university's peer group, end quote. The president justified that this was warranted due to increased responsibilities assumed, though there's little specifics on what that means exactly. The president mentioned that they are also trying to balance the school's budget by 2025 by raising tuition, implementing a hiring freeze, and a 3% budget cut. I'm having difficulty seeing how raising one person's salary by 16% is part of that plan. As far as the meeting to discuss and approve this proposal, it was first a private executive session followed by a public portion that was, quote, less than 90 seconds with members simply referring to a salary adjustment and Thorndike without specifically mentioning the extent of the pay increase, end quote. I want to emphasize that's less than 2 minutes. By hiding behind a veil of vagueness and lack of public awareness, the Board of Trustees is able to quietly raise tuition and increase their own wages with almost no criticism. Even when faculty and students call out the decision from the Board of Trustees, it rarely gains attention. In the collegeofthedesert.com link below, they provide videos of messages to the board about deceit, delays, and disinformation. I will point out that this is not the same as the college's actual website, which ends in .edu and not .com. Mary Lou Marujo addresses the board with how the trustees extended a contract and wage increase for the school's president despite various issues that were raised and continue to exist.
I've lost track of the number of my former COD coworkers who texted me after they saw the amendment to Martha Garcia's employment contract. What a self-serving act it was for her to add it to the agenda. A year's extension, 6 additional months of severance pay, and a salary increase of more than $42,000 a year. What a slap in the face to the community. What a brutal message to send to her employees. further destroying their morale.
Dr. Kim Dozier also addresses the board and expresses that the president and the board are not working in the best interests of the school. She points out that basic infrastructure of the school is not being maintained, yet the school actively works to try and recruit more students within this crumbling system.
The atmosphere is bleak. Let's get back to the business of student success being the priority and having the tools and technology working consistently. I cannot believe we have allowed our technology to suffer in such a manner and not act with a sense of urgency.
She even provides solutions for the issues presented if the board was interested in making changes for improvement. There are more links to videos of the Board of Trustees meetings below. For now, let's move to the next example. The article from Los Cerritos News linked below is written by the Law Department Chair of Cerritos College and lambasts the board for approving a bonus of $40,000 to the college president based on student success, though he has never taught any classes. The board also approved 5% salary increases for themselves in the past 2 years, yet no pay raises for faculty. Quote, maybe one would think that the Cerritos College Board of Trustees only has enough money for themselves and the president of the college. However, the Cerritos College District has more than $40 million in accessible reserves and more than $30 million in unspent federal C-19 funds. Cerritos College District can provide appropriate compensation for its employees to help with inflation, it just won't, end quote. The last example for this section is from a 2019 Great Tribune article regarding Barton Community College. With a 6-0 vote, a 7% wage increase for all employees was approved in order to be competitive. In this case, the board seems to be more informed of the situation at the college and recognized that the staff was able to keep expenses down, which contributed to the ability to maintain a reserve and ultimately salary increases for all staff and faculty. When it came to the contract for the college president, this item was tabled for the next meeting and was not automatically approved or given a separate wage increase. The situation from Barton Community College is not the norm. If you search for the board decisions for schools, it's more likely you'll run into stagnant wages for faculty and consistent increases in tuition for students. This is partly due to being able to function with little oversight and make decisions in their own best interest. One solution presented from the Forbes article mentioned previously is to have a third party be tasked with presenting information to the Board of Trustees rather than the school president. The Board of Trustees should also not be the only ones deciding if their salaries increase. I rarely hear critiques about the trustees when people discuss the cost of higher education, and I think the ending of the article from Cerritos College sums it up best. Quote, in 3 separate public comment sections before the board, I asked the board to please advise faculty of the reason for their pay increases, but no pay raises for faculty or other school employees. The board refused to respond. Maybe because there is no response that makes sense. Or maybe the board thinks the public is unaware of their actions and they want to keep it that way, end quote.
So how's it going with you, Mr. Ivy League Big Shot?
It's great. It's a whole new world. Listen, I'm gonna get to my cow class. I'll talk to you later.
Tuition at my college didn't increase just after I left. I graduated on time in 4 years, but by my senior year, tuition had increased 32% from what it was my freshman year, but there was no increase in scholarships or grants. This wasn't the only thing I had to consider. Some of my friends had transferred after freshman and sophomore year, but because of how classes were structured in comparison to other schools, they often had to attend an extra semester or year of college to make up for that. So in the end, did they really save any money by transferring? Not really. Another option I have heard is that students should take time off to earn more money to pay for school instead of trying to get it all done at once. First, many of the articles I found were for a different audience. Those of us who are poor don't take time off from school so we can backpack through Europe or work on our meditation skills. Let's say a close relative becomes ill. Our student may be the person that has to leave school to help take care of them. Leaving university for something like this isn't a vacation. Needing a mental break from school is one thing, and while one period of non-enrollment does not appear to affect the chances of finishing school, 2 or more periods greatly decrease the odds of a student completing a 4-year degree. 54% of students cited an inability to balance work and school, and 31% were unable to afford tuition. Which students are more likely to work and attend school at the same time? The poorest. Which students are less likely to afford tuition? The poorest. Finding a balance between work and school is mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausting. Students that come from a privileged background will have more flexibility in their schedules. A student working a full-time job while attending college may not be able to attend study groups or access academic resources because of time constraints. If the student falls behind, it is that much more difficult to catch up if they are even able to. Poorest students can't even depend on financial aid. FAFSA is discussed in many other sources, so I'll only briefly mention it here. Let's say we have a student and they have completed the FAFSA and they qualify for the Pell Grant and a few others. Even though their family is below the poverty line, their financial aid package only covers 70% of tuition, and if the current average in-state tuition in 2021 to 2022 is $10,740 a year, that means the student needs to come up with $3,222 for the remaining balance. Keep in mind, this does not cover room and board, books, some lab fees, and other costs associated with school. Also, financial aid packages include government student loans within that, so it's not always grants and scholarships, and students are limited on the amount of government loans they can use each year. My college had a tuition work program where a certain amount that wasn't covered by tuition could be paid in installments without interest during the school year. If we divide $3,222 by 9 months, it comes to $358 a month. At first glance, that might seem doable. I mentioned previously that my tuition increased 32% in 4 years, which isn't far off that average 9% yearly increase. A 32% increase of $10,740 is $14,176.80. Even though tuition went up each year, my financial aid did not. For this example, that means it would remain at $7,518 each year. In using our example, the tuition work plan payments would increase to roughly $740 a month by senior year. If a student is working 20 hours a week at $15 an hour, that would be $15,600 yearly before taxes, $10,920 after about 30% taxes are taken out, which would be roughly $910 a month. Unless a student is living at home and has some savings, they're barely going to be able to cover tuition, never mind the cost of food, books, transportation, or housing. The student would have to work full-time, which means less time to study, limited time to access labs if their major requires it, and hope that no major life events occurs, such as major illness or injury. This is assuming that our student is able to put this amount of their wages in savings towards school. In many lower-income households, there is more than one person contributing to the expenses. The student may be helping pay some of the utilities, food, or housing for their family.
My son is hard to understand. If making movies help him be understood, then I pay for the class.
With falafel as a fallback.
It's even worse if the student has parents that are immigrants. Even though the number of students from immigrant families attending college is increasing, their dropout rate is higher because many of them come from poor households. In the New York Times article linked below, quote, "They juggle multiple responsibilities, which makes it more challenging for them to stay in school and complete their degrees on time," Ms. Batalova said. If there is a health or family emergency, they lack a safety net to fall back on. That interferes with attending classes and completing assignments, end quote. Later in the article, one of the students that is attending school says, quote, "Like many children of immigrants, he works almost full-time while studying to pay for his phone, gas, car insurance, and other personal expenses. Several days a week, he helps track orders and pack shipments in a warehouse for a clothing manufacturer in Los Angeles' garment district," end quote. Then there are more expenses if the student has to live on campus or off campus in their own place. Not everyone has the luxury of being able to live at home, and for some it's actually unhealthy to stay at home. This often means that the same students will have to take out more student loans to cover basic expenses. It's also likely the interest rate on these loans will be variable, meaning it can change. Not every student can qualify for federal loans, and the federal loans may not cover enough, so that leaves private loans that are often predatory. What about working to save up enough money? At the rate tuition is increasing every year, it is going to be worse the longer a student waits to attend. Having a large savings account can also hurt the amount of financial aid a student receives, and I don't see anyone mention that. Let's say our student took a year off to work after high school before attending college and manages to save up $10,000 because they lived at home and were extremely lucky enough to have parents to help out with transportation and food. With that amount of savings, it is assumed that some of it will be used for college. So now instead of having a financial aid package that covers 70% of tuition, it will only cover 10%. So our student uses their savings and covers the tuition for their freshman year and plans to work part-time to save up for the next year. Again, this isn't necessarily a bad plan, but tuition will continue to increase, and our student has to hope that nothing major goes wrong during that time and that they can continue to keep making enough to cover tuition. Notice that in these scenarios, I have not mentioned parents helping pay for tuition. My parents were unable to help me, so I knew that I could never ask them for help financially. The increasing cost of housing and groceries has put a strain on families recently, so even those who want to help their children are unable to do so without putting themselves at financial risk. Let's look at the student that has 70% financial aid package. Outside of their financial aid package, they would be responsible for $19,043.42 total. As a reminder, this is only tuition and not housing, food, books, and other expenses. Not to mention, if $3,000 of the financial aid package each year is federal loans, that's an additional $12,000 our student will have to pay at the end of school, bringing the total to $31,043.42 for tuition that they are responsible for.
And the lowest grade in the class?
She's gonna say my name!
Lisa Simpson, 0.
Lisa, the president of Harvard would like a word with you.
Nasty business, that, 0. Naturally, Harvard's doors are now closed to you, but I'll pass your file along to Brown.
Heck of a school. Weren't you at Brown, Otto?
Yep. Almost got tenure, too.
No, not Brown!
There's other factors that affect the poorest students the most. For example, unpaid internships. Students that pursue law are often required to complete internships for coursework or to have any chance at a job after graduation. A student that has to work full-time or part-time is going to have greater difficulty in finding time to fit this into their schedule. If an internship doesn't fit within their work schedule, the student may end up leaving their job and taking a student loan to cover that time period, or they may just skip the internship altogether, which leaves them at a disadvantage when it comes to making professional connections and relevant work experience. Teaching also requires some work outside of classes that will be difficult to fit in, and some states now require a master's degree and a bachelor's is not enough. Not to mention those entering the medical field will be in school forever, essentially, and then often have to complete a residency program. In Better Call Saul, Kim Wexler is extremely fortunate that she was able to work in a mailroom of a law firm that paid her way for school, and in return, she would work at the firm for a time in order to pay back that loan. This is not the norm for most students, and very few companies offer this type of program anymore. Students from a lower socioeconomic background are also not going to have as much opportunity to socialize and make connections on campus during school. Attending class, working, studying, and homework take up so much time that sleep is barely able to be fit in, much less an active social life that could possibly lead to other connections in the future. From The Atlantic, quote, "In plain words, poor kids have less support and fewer resources to get into the right schools and succeed once they're there," end quote. The Posse Foundation works to try and connect these students together in order to provide a support system they would not have otherwise. By doing so, the students that were part of this program achieved a 90% graduation rate, which supersedes even the wealthy students. Of course, we have to factor in poor chaos. As I've defined in other videos, poor chaos is when factors that can or cannot be controlled impact the positive steps that have been taken to escape poverty. If our student graduates in 4 years, they'll be exhausted and burnt out. But they can't take a break. They have to find employment almost immediately. Some private student loans require payments starting the month after graduation versus federal loans which start at 6 months. If the first payment is missed, it greatly affects your credit score. A poor credit score affects your ability to get a loan for a car, your chances at renting certain apartments, and may affect which jobs are available to you. Once again, the poorest students are required to overcome several hurdles before they even have a chance. Even if our student stops attending college for 2 years, they are still responsible for those student loans. Many schools require that any outstanding balance is satisfied before being able to reapply, while others may only require a percentage, like 80%. If our student is working part-time at $15 an hour and unable to find full-time employment or has other debts, it's going to be difficult to go back. From the Atlantic article linked below, quote, "While more than 80% of high-income students enrolled in college in 2012, only about half of low-income students did the same, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. And among those that did not make it on campus, more than half of the wealthier students graduated, dwarfing the 9% of low-income ones who managed to do the same," economists Martha Bailey and Susan Donarski of the University of Michigan found, end quote. This is backed up in another study cited in the Slate article, quote, "At every level of academic ability, the low-income students were less likely to finish college than their wealthier peers. Yet more depressing, exceptionally smart poor kids whose math scores ranked them among the top quarter of the study's participants were no more likely to attain a bachelor's degree than scholastically middling rich kids," end quote. Weishman further adds, quote, "There's another sad fact that underlines all of these issues. High-achieving, low-income students are rare. The Department of Education found that slightly less than 10% high schoolers from poor families had top math scores, compared to 48% of those from wealthier backgrounds. Not many kids who can overcome poverty tend to excel academically, and we're failing far too many of the kids that do," end quote.
People power!
Wall Street, it crashes, and people starve, people lose their jobs, things like that. We're very angry at Wall Street. It's the heart of capitalism, American capitalism especially. That's why we're here today at Wall Street.
If the hurdles of obtaining a 4-year degree weren't enough of a challenge, then there's life after walking across the stage, diploma in hand. During the recession in 2008, more jobs started to require higher education as a way to weed out applicants. For example, administrative assistant positions that previously required a GED were now able to tack on a requirement for a bachelor's degree while keeping the same low wage. This occurred at the same time that many companies were only accepting applications online and requiring ridiculous add-ons like a 2-hour personality test. That meant that a student who went to college in hopes of escaping poverty entered a job market after graduation in which there were few entry-level positions, and a job market that saw experienced people fighting for the same $20 an hour jobs after being laid off. Without connections, extreme luck, or specific job experience, many graduates were out of luck. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, many students were pushed by family and schools to pursue higher education because working in fast food or retail was considered something that only uneducated poor people did.
This time I focused on the unintended consequences of promoting a 4-year degree as the best path for the most people. There was a time when higher education needed a PR campaign, and it got one. Unfortunately, the push for 4-year institutions came at the expense of community colleges, trade schools, and apprenticeship programs. Thus, every other educational opportunity began to feel subordinate.
Many college graduates during this recession were applying to fast food and retail positions with mixed responses. There were times I was turned down for jobs not because I couldn't do it, but because they saw me as someone that would not stay at that job very long. I was considered too educated, or I failed the ableist personality test. Even when millennial graduates were able to gain employment, commonly it was part-time, so they didn't have the benefits like health insurance. In order to make up for this, for some of us it meant working 2 to 3 part-time jobs and juggling a complicated work schedule, hoping nothing catastrophic happens. If you look through the Tumblr for We Are the 99%, you'll see story after story of this same situation. This is not sustainable.
We are out here with a group of people who are protesting our country's history of allowing corporate greed to go unpunished.
At the same time the 2008 recession occurred, instead of helping a disillusioned generation that was lied to and told that working hard will pay off, the US government chose to bail out Wall Street in the aftermath of scammers like Bernie Madoff. This was a catalyst for the Occupy Wall Street movement that has mostly disappeared from.
Yes. Was the name not a clue?
The Occupy Wall Street movement grew from other groups, such as the US Day of Rage. The US Day of Rage protested, quote, corporate influence that corrupts our political parties, our elections, and the institutions of government, end quote. This movement highlighted the income and wealth inequality with slogans such as We Are the 99%, referring to the fact that the majority of wealth in the US is held by 1% of wealthy elites who are able to sway policies in their favor without regard to how it affects the rest of the country. Rest assured, protesters were monitored by the Department of Homeland Security. Their special report from October 2011 was revealed by WikiLeaks. Homeland Security keeps a file on this movement and monitors things such as social media. While the government may have labeled it as a peaceful movement to the public, both the Partnership for Civil Justice and New York Times reported declassified documents revealing extensive surveillance of the Occupy Wall Street movement. That's not to say that the Occupy Wall Street movement is immune to criticism. It did lack representation for people of color, it did not have clear and defined goals, and in some cases drew in the wrong crowd. In recent years, though, Occupy Wall Street has died down, but it influenced other movements, such as fast food workers protesting for a higher minimum wage. At the end of the day, the government still bailed out large banks and companies and left a disadvantaged generation with a pessimistic view of the future. More recently, there was an initial proposal to forgive $50,000 in student loans for borrowers, which then went down to $20,000 for those that qualified for Pell Grants and $10,000 for everyone else, and now zero forgiveness. Many of us remember the government bailouts from over a decade ago, and we're not surprised to see this happen again. The pettiness and arguments from those in Congress confirms the suspicions we had in the beginning. I will discuss student loan repayment and interest in another video. For now, I want to focus on how student loan forgiveness was another example of how those with decision-making power are still disconnected from reality. Not every person needs to attend higher education, or even wants to. They shouldn't need to just to have a slightly higher chance at obtaining a job to cover basic needs. Higher education is once again turning into an option that only exists for a select few. There needs to be more criticism and transparency when tuition increases. A student shouldn't be barred from pursuing a career as a doctor simply because they are poor. Regardless of education, we should be able to afford a safe home and sufficient food without working 3 jobs. It's unsustainable to have a workforce with less free time than a medieval peasant because it's only a matter of time before they've had enough.
Oh my God! Movable printed type! We must keep this from the serfs lest they gain literacy and threaten the landed gentry.
What you got there, my lord?
Nothing! Back to your turnips!
And for the love of cookies, just give us the $50,000 student loan forgiveness for everyone, period. I guarantee you our country will be better off and the future slightly brighter. Until next time.
Come on.
All right, that's a good point. It's good. Yes.
Yeah, the taxes.
The finger thing means the taxes.
Well, I guess this is a case where we'll have to agree to disagree.
I don't agree to that.
Neither do I.